Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 17th of January, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that on the phone at 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. That will lead you in any direction you need for aviation weather. Look for the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, looking for the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, and freeze-up conditions on your local rivers and streams. And of course, you can find information about any ongoing or tsunami threats in the area, should they occur. And of course, you'll get your local forecast information from Fairbanks, Juneau, and Anchorage. And if you can't find what you want, please let me know. david.snider@noaa.gov is how you find me. You may have seen this already on Facebook and Twitter. Make sure you're following us there. But as always, we're waiting for winter to come back in many parts of Alaska, and there are certain big hints that that is happening. The jet stream later in the week and into the weekend is going to build a large ridge across the western Bering Sea and eastern Siberia. If you are a frequent user of social media and you follow a lot of weather trends, you might have seen some postings by the World Meteorological Organization saying they reported temperatures from 60 to 80 below around parts of Siberia. Well, that's where all this cold is coming from. Now, it's not going to be that cold in Alaska, but the source of the air mass, which is this big bubble of changing weather and its kind of own similar characteristics, this air mass is dropping southward. And at first, it's going to reach the North Slope as we get into Thursday night and Friday morning. That cold air will keep coming through the weekend and build into the west coast. And looks like the Alaska range, as usual, will keep most of South Central from getting the big blast of this. But the cold's going to keep coming, and through a large part of next week, it will be significantly colder than it's been for most of us for most of the winter. And as we get toward the end of the week, places in southwestern Alaska, probably the upper Kuskokwim, Norton Sound, and probably the interior, which could include Fairbanks and maybe even some parts of the North Slope, could be 25 to 30 degrees below normal for this time of the year. So we'll go from fairly mild weather where freezing rain becomes possible to it's so cold and dry, precipitation is likely not going to happen, at least in any big case. So big changes coming. Make sure you're paying attention to your forecast. You can do that anytime. Again at weather.gov/Alaska. Here's a look at what's going on right now. Winter weather advisories are posted for the Brooks Range, the upper Koyukuk, and into the middle Yukon valleys there for the Noatak and Kobuk valleys around Ambler out toward Bettles, and generally north of Galena. We're expecting as much as 4 to 7 inches of snow. As you get out here toward the Brooks Range, it'll probably be a little bit closer to as much as 5. Places around Bettles as of early this afternoon had already reported 5 inches of snow, so you're going to be on the higher side of that in some areas. But snow is falling, and snow should start to diminish as we go through the evening hours there. Winter weather advisories for these regions will expire at 6 o'clock in the morning. Here's a look at the satellite picture now, and low pressure across the central Gulf is still working its way north and west. This area of low pressure is falling apart. The one that's still active is across the central and northern interior, and that's where the snow is coming for places like Galena and points north. You can see another band of cloud cover and precipitation across the southern sections of southeast. Some heavier rainfall around the Ketchikan area this afternoon. And clouds are building in and starting to move in from a north and northwesterly direction across the west coast. We've got a weak area of high pressure here around St. Paul, breaking up some of the clouds, and then another low across the western Bering Sea. That is driving eastward with a weak front moving across the central chain and low pressure a little bit closer to Shemya. Here's the surface chart. Low pressures across the interior right now just east of Bettles at 992 millibars. Snow is still going on the western side of that. And across Bristol Bay, some areas of light snow, rain on the south side of the peninsula and around the Kenai Peninsula as well. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf sits at 965 millibars. The front's working its way northward, and it's probably going to dance back southward as we go ahead in time. Out to the west, a 988 millibar low around Shemya. That is slowly pushing a front across the central Aleutians with snow around the eastern part of the chain. That's going to wobble around in the west for the next 24 hours or so. You'll see that front stretching its way out across the western Bering Sea, but I think more importantly is what's happening up here. These rings are all around that really cold high pressure system, and it is trying as hard as it can to push its way into western Alaska. A little bit of colder air is going to work its way across the Chukchi coast, and the snow will continue in the north tonight, some of that reaching very close to Fairbanks. Most areas across southwest will have a chance at some snow showers, and high pressures lingering just east of the Alcan border. That means fog is a possibility for the Copper River Basin. Watch for some light precipitation across southern southeast. No warnings, watches, or advisories for you. It might be a little breezy, though, as we head into tonight and tomorrow. As you look up north, clouds are breaking up across the Alcan. Snow showers continue around Bristol Bay out towards St. Paul. And low pressure is still sitting in the same old spot out across the west. And when that usually happens, we start to see that number there in black come up. And now it's 1,002 millibars. That's a sign that that low pressure system is filling in and weakening and will probably eventually latch onto something else and dissolve or move on its merry way. So what you notice again on Thursday is the high pressure center. That's at 1,030 millibars at this point. That's going to keep moving eastward as we get into Friday, and that's when the cold air starts to move in. Thursday night and Friday morning for the North Slope, temperatures will start your day below zero. You'll see that in just a moment. Look for that northerly flow to work its way down the west coast as well. That colder air will continue pushing southward as we go through the weekend. But for many in South Central, it won't be quite as cold as what we experience in the interior, the west, or the North Slope, of course. And again, that is all due to the mountains. Across the Central Gulf, a 992 millibar low there is really the bigger player in town. This is going to try and slosh some moisture up toward Kodiak Island, a rain and snow mix possible for you in areas just offshore of the Alaska Peninsula. And we still have a weak area of low pressure here around the Dixon entrance. This is gradually going away, but it sure is taking a long time to get to that point, with high pressure across the western parts of the Yukon, pushing drier air into more parts of southeast, so still fair weather for you. But colder air is going to try and drop southward across the Brooks Range and into the interior as we get into Saturday and Sunday. And much colder weather is on the way behind that. Low temperatures for Thursday morning, you're still looking at teens for many parts of the interior. The North Slope above zero. Look at Kotzebue at 10, 11 in Nome, 15 in Nunivak Island, mid-20s for St. Paul and St. George. Water temperatures out here are still in the mid to upper 30s. It is warm for this time of the year. Upper 20s and lower 30s for Southwest and the Chain, 32 around Kodiak, and upper 20s and mid-30s for many in Southeast to start your day tomorrow. High temperatures tomorrow in the interior, still looking at teens and 20s for many locations. Barrow 17, 18 in Kaktovik, 12 for Kotzebue, 12 as well for Nome. Galena, you're looking at temps in the mid-teens, 20s for the Parks Highway system, as well as the Glen, all the way down to South Central and the Kenai, 20s and 30s there, 37 in Kodiak. Bristol Bay and Dillingham and King Salmon just shy of 30 tomorrow afternoon. Friday morning, you're looking at 20s and 30s in Southeast. South Central, teens and 20s, 28 in Kodiak. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, 29, 24 in St. Paul for Friday morning. 1 below in Nome. There's some of the cold there. 5 below in Barrow and 15 below as you get out toward Point Hope and Point Lay. Wainwright, 12 below. 1 above though in Kaktovik, holding on to a hint of warmth. And -3 in Fairbanks as we get into daytime high temperatures. You can see the cold is still spilling southward. We're down into single digits now for Bethel. Unalakleet, Nome looking at 4, and Kotzebue Sound temperatures well below 0. We'll have a look at more of the cold coming up in the rest of the week, so make sure you're paying attention to that as we look at Fairbanks on Friday, a high of only 8.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Time now for aviation weather, and as you look at the interior, we're starting to see many more areas of IFR. Colder air is starting to sneak in. There's still plenty of moisture in, and low pressure is working its way out of the picture. So this transition period is going to start to create a better chance of poor visibility and lower ceilings for many locations on top of a lingering threat of ice in some parts of the interior. So the North Slope, you're looking at IFR to get started, a band of IFR across the Bering, and notice MVFR is lingering across central and southern parts of Southeast, and across a large part of South Central as well, all the way out through Kodiak Island. Look for IFR around the Yukon Flats and in the upper Tanana Valley. As we get into the afternoon, that kind of thickens up and seals up a little bit more across the interior. So widespread MVFR for tomorrow afternoon. Moving around by plane may be a little bit more on the tricky side for you there. For Southeast, MVFR conditions are really confined to the southern third of the panhandle there. For northern areas, things look to be VFR all the way over to Prince William Sound, in fact, and into the Anchorage Bowl and northward into the Copper River Basin, as well as many along the park's corridor. But south of that, from Kenai toward Kodiak Island, the Barren Islands, and southwest, you're looking at fairly widespread MVFR. IFR conditions should diminish out across the central and western chain for your Friday morning, but they're still pretty thick there across the central and eastern interior, all the way down to Denali and maybe even into the upper Kuskokwim, northward into the North Slope from Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay to Barrow, all the way out toward Wainwright, but it stops just short of punching into the Kotzebue Sound region. By the time we get into the afternoon, you can see a lot of this is still retreating to the east, but we have widespread IFR all the way from Fairbanks northward. South of that, though, we have increasing areas of VFR for South Central, the Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, And MVFR is starting to move northward once again into the central and southern parts of southeast, with a little bit of IFR stretching around the Alaska Peninsula region and just south of the western chain. MVFR still fairly widespread, as you would imagine, for the Bering Sea. Major pass conditions now for AKwx and Adigan Pass. Tomorrow we expect to see MVFR transitioning to IFR conditions through your Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will likely hold at IFR in the morning with some improvement noted in the afternoon. Rainy Pass may be stuck at IFR through a large part of your Thursday. For Windy Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions through most of Thursday, and Isabel Pass, once again looking at IFR, maybe some improvement as the day goes on. Mentasta Pass, looking for marginal conditions through most of the day. We expect to see Tanita Pass at MVFR toward VFR conditions by the afternoon. As you look at Portage Pass, marginal conditions in the morning and a lot of improvement headed for the afternoon, maybe lasting into Friday as well. Chilkoot and White Pass look to be in the clear as we get into Thursday for you southeast travelers. The freezing levels right now indicate that warmer air is trying to sneak its way back into the Bering Sea. It probably will be very short-lived because a pretty large surge of cold air is coming, as we've talked about. Out across southeast, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 foot freezing levels aloft are noted from about Yakutat all the way down toward Port Alexander and southward into the Dixon entrance, for those levels to climb even more. What about icing potential? Well, we're still looking at a lot of moisture being sloshed up into the region by that broad area of surface low pressure. Because of that, levels above 1,000 feet in the North Slope may see isolated moderate icing potential. South of the Brooks Range, those levels go from below 5,000 feet to about 7,000 feet across areas in southwest. South Central is starting to dry up a little bit more, and the same goes for the Northern Gulf. Southeast, anywhere above 8,000 feet, you may run into some isolated moderate icing potential there, as well as southern sections of the Bering Sea out around the Pribilofs. Here's a jet stream, and something to note is we've been talking about the advance of colder air. The cold air source region is out here across eastern Siberia. The main Pacific jet stream is taking a dive, kind of stair-stepping its way down across into the western Gulf and the North Pacific. And you can see a much stronger wind pattern here across the west coast. This trough is building, and out here, the ridge is building, and this is going to allow this air to move up and then descend quickly across western parts of Alaska. So this entire area here is going to see a pattern change in the next 3 to 5, maybe as much as 7 days, where a lot of cold air is being moved in on a northerly flow. And you can already see a little bit of a hint of that at 9,000 feet. High pressure here across the Gulf of Anadyr trying to get things started, with low pressure weak across the northern Gulf and across areas near Haida Gwaii. A weak area of low pressure across the Alcan border. Northerlies at 15 knots out west, more of an east and southeasterly flow. A very similar pattern here on Thursday for 3,000 feet. Light northerly winds on the west coast, fairly light winds in southeast, the North Slope, and most of the Bering Sea. So what does that mean for your turbulence with light winds and northerly winds developing out across the west? Well, we're still watching for some chop around the Kotzebue Sound region. Most of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island below 4,000 feet. That'll be the biggest trouble area. Southeast, still leftover chop here across southern parts below 6,000 feet, and some chop across the western Bering Sea below 4,000 feet. We'll have a look at your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
But let's say you're really lost. This is a learning opportunity, right? So let's do a little situational simulation. First, note your compass heading. Write it down and note the time. If it's taken you a few minutes of zigzagging to figure out you're lost, try to determine the general heading you were flying when you realized you had a positional problem. Once the general course you've been flying is established, locate your last known position on the chart. Maybe it was a bend in a river, a cooling tower, a VOR, or an airport you passed. What heading were you flying that took you there? Was the point on or off your course? If it was off course, on which side and by what distance? How long ago was it? Pre-flight planning gave you a general idea of your expected ground speed. Let's say 120 knots or 2 miles a minute. Let's say, for example, you've flown 15 minutes from your last confirmed position. That's 30 miles. Draw a line on your chart from the last known position out to 40 miles. Describe an arc of 45 degrees on either side, and assuming you haven't been abducted by space aliens, you've got to be inside that arc. Now look at the chart and try to determine your general position. Note nav aids and landmarks you can use to help re-establish your position. Remember that you've got to fly the airplane and look for traffic while you're trying to sort this out. See why losing positional awareness can create cockpit chaos? Depending on your estimated distance from that last known point, returning to that location may be the best option. Fly the reciprocal of the heading you noted, adjusting for the effects the winds have already had on your course. However, if a just-can't-miss-it checkpoint is only a few minutes ahead, stay the course. Locating your position may be as easy as tuning in a VOR, finding the radial you're on, looking for landmarks on the ground, and getting a cross-check from another station. This is another reason to get a thorough pre-flight briefing. A VOR you plan to use may be NOTAMed out of service, or it may have radials that are unusable at certain altitudes and distances. If you try using the VOR in these cases, you could become even more confused, because you could be exactly where you think you are, yet the VOR can't be used to confirm your hunch. Losing positional awareness is a stressful situation, no matter how much fuel you have on board. In your haste, you could inadvertently dial in the wrong frequency, so be sure to identify the VOR station. Now center the needle to determine what radial you're on. Rotate the OBS ring so the arrow points to the station and the indicator reads 2. The radial you're on is the reciprocal of the indicated radial, the one that's on the bottom of the ring. Draw a line along this radial from the VOR station. You're somewhere close to where this line crosses your course line. Once you know the radial you're on, the next question to answer is how far from the station you are. Using another VOR to get a cross radial is one simple way. Fly toward the first VOR, keeping the needle centered while you tune in the second VOR. If you're in an area where VORs are few and far between, or in a mountainous environment, picking up a VOR may also be problematic. Climbing to a higher altitude will improve your reception, but you may not be able to climb. There could be an overcast layer above you, or in the mountains, it could push you to oxygen altitudes. If you can only pick up one VOR and can't spot any landmarks to help you determine distance, the easiest way is to fly to the VOR. Again, keep your head. Pilots have been known to center the needle without turning to the station. They stay on the heading they're flying, continually centering the needle, getting farther from the station and more confused with every minute. It sounds like a hard mistake to make, but strange things happen when you're alone in the cockpit and lost. If you can climb, do it. It'll give you a bigger picture of the ground as well as better radio reception. It will also increase the range of your radio transmissions in case you do have to call for help. Look on the chart for landmarks that should be visible from the aircraft. But don't just look for landmarks you see on the chart. Look at the surrounding topography too, and look for any outstanding features of the terrain that can help you locate your position on the chart. Look for lakes or rivers, power lines, railroad tracks, or highways. Now look on the chart and see if you see any corresponding features. Look for a series of landmarks that can't possibly be mistaken. The airport south of the highway on the island east of the Twin Bridges has so many good landmarks associated with it, it's impossible to miss. Bet you wish you were going to Bay Bridge, huh, Dave? NDBs are also good sources of positional information. Look for any NDBs on the chart, then dial in the frequency. Identify the NDB just as you did the VOR. This will assure you're picking up the signal you intended. If you lost positional awareness at night, you'll be robbed of most visual references. For that reason, if you're going on a night flight, even more planning is required. It's imperative to chart out the route beforehand, selecting nav aids to use and cross-checking radials. Plan to complete flights over unfamiliar territory before sunset. Many experienced pilots require higher ceiling and visibility when flying at night. What happens if you can't regain positional awareness on your own? Even if you have plenty of fuel, but you can't reestablish your location, by all means call for help. That doesn't mean you have to declare an emergency. Remember, FARs mandate how much fuel reserve you need for a VFR flight. The Air Safety Foundation recommends at least 1 hour reserve for all flights. If continuing the search on your own will compromise your fuel reserve, it's time to ask for assistance. It's relatively easy for ATC to find you with its radar. But how do you find ATC? It's unlikely you have instrument approach charts on board. The charts have the controlling ATC frequency for each approach. That makes it easy to flip to the approach for an airport somewhere in the vicinity and find the ATC frequency. There are other ways to find the frequency. Contact the tower of an airport in your vicinity and ask them for the frequency of the controlling ATC facility and whether it's a center or approach or departure control. You can call flight service also on 122.2. Once you find the frequency you want, whether a tower, flight service station, or an ATC facility, tune it in. Don't start talking. Listen first to make sure you don't step on a transmission.
Leesburg Radio, Cessna 734 Zulu Sierra.
Cessna 734 Zulu Sierra, Leesburg Radio, go ahead.
Cessna 4 Zulu Sierra is about 30 miles northeast of Frederick, Maryland, and I need to get an ATC frequency for this area, over.
734 Zulu Sierra, roger. You can contact Washington Center at 132.5.
132.5 for Zulu Sierra. Washington Center, Cessna 734 Zulu Sierra.
734 Zulu Sierra, go ahead.
734 Zulu Sierra is about 30 miles northeast of Frederick, and I'd like to confirm my position by radar.
734 Zulu Sierra, roger. Squawk 2244, NIDAN.
2244 for Zulu Sierra.
Cessna 4 Zulu Sierra, your radar contact over the Hanover Airport.
4 Zulu Sierra, thank you.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of your sea ice edge. If you've been following along the last several days, we've gone from some patchy areas of open water north of the Bering Strait to a lot of that beginning to fill in. We're seeing more of a northerly flow develop across the region. We're probably going to see more ice pushing southward, not only physical ice moving southward, but also freezing up as we move towards St. Lawrence Island. So watch for some changes here south of the Bering Strait and in parts of Norton Sound, especially as the air temperature starts to go down. Starting as early as Thursday night and Friday, and then certainly through the bulk of next week. We should also probably pay attention to parts of Cook Inlet with the colder weather on the way. So changes are coming. You can track along anytime you want at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. In southeast, we've got more of an offshore and down mountain wind going across most areas. So it's going to be a little gusty at times around Stevens Passage, a gust to 35 knots there at 20 knots sustained. 4-foot seas and the Dixon entrance, Clarence Strait all the way through Stevens and into the Lynn Canal at 6-foot seas there. An offshore wind blowing, and this is all being driven into low pressure just south and west of the Dixon entrance. Seas ranging from about 13 to 19 feet, the highest of which south of Sitka. 25 knots there blowing offshore with a 16-foot sea sustained there on Thursday. Now, as we get into Friday, things should settle out a little bit more. More of a north and westerly flow coming parallel to the coast, 10 to 20 knots there at best, 9 to 11-foot seas on the inside, anywhere from 2 to 6-foot seas. The smaller seas and lighter winds down around the Clarence Strait region, and still looking at some breezy conditions up around the Lynn Canal, 30 knots with a 6-foot sea on Friday. For South Central, pretty calm conditions there. Northerlies across the Cook Inlet region, 15 knots as you head south of Kenai toward Homer and Kashmak Bay. Westerlies blowing across the northern Gulf, 10 to 15, looking at 5, even 7-foot seas in some cases. Small seas and light winds across Prince William Sound with a northwest flow at 15 knots on Thursday. Even better on Friday, light winds from the west, 10 knots, 2-foot seas, 10 to 15 knots at best across the northern Gulf, and similar conditions across Cook Inlet, 2 to 4-foot seas as you head west of the Barrens with that northwesterly flow at 15 knots on Friday. Inside Bristol Bay, 20 knots from the north and west, 6-foot seas there as you head down the coast, 8-foot seas expected on a 25-knot wind. For the North Pacific, 20 to 30 knots in all areas, a 4-foot sea inside of Shelikof Strait, otherwise about 7 to 10-foot seas there across the western Gulf. Westerlies blowing at 25 to 30, and that should diminish a little bit more as high pressure is still kind of trying to calm things down a little bit. Northwesterlies 15 knots with 3 to 8-foot seas there in the region, but northerlies will start to strengthen as colder air is moving southward. Along the west coast, we'll see winds come up and temperatures go down. 4 to 11-foot seas there across the Bering Sea coast, northwesterly south of the peninsula with a 20-knot flow and 9-foot seas expected there for Friday. For the Aleutians, light winds from the west for the central and eastern chain, generally 15 to 20 knots there, a little bit more of a southwesterly flow. South of the eastern chain with 9-foot seas there, 13 to 16-foot seas on the Pacific coast, and 17 to 22-foot seas out in the west, 30 to 35 knots from the west on Thursday. And you can see a big shift there as that colder air is pushing southward. We're going to get into more of an east and southeasterly return flow. 30 to 40 knots there across the western chain with 10-foot seas, expecting 6 to 8-foot seas across the Bering Sea coast for the central and eastern chain, and 15 to 20 knot winds with 9 to 12-foot seas expected across the Pacific coast for your Friday. Here's the west coast. Northerlies are already in place by Thursday, 25 knots in most areas. The Pribilofs looking at 15 with a 7-foot sea, I should say, a northeasterly flow there. As we get into Friday, notice the winds and the seas coming up a little bit more around the Pribilofs, 10-foot seas there, 6 to 8-foot seas south of St. Lawrence Island. Still looking at that northerly flow. And again, it is going to start getting a lot colder in this area. As we look up north, an easterly flow around the Beaufort Sea, 20 to 25. Northwesterly onshore flow here for the Chukchi coast, 30 knots with 25 knots north of St. Lawrence Island. We've got a weak front sitting right about here. We've still got some warmer air across the Beaufort Sea and much colder weather here. This cold is going to eventually win with an onshore flow as we get into Friday, 20 to 25 knots from the west, and westerlies start to push their way across the rest of the Beaufort Sea coast at about 25 knots. Northerlies now south of the Bering Sea. Recapping tonight's weather, snow is going to continue across the upper Koyukuk, the middle Yukon, north of Galena, and generally west of the Dalton Highway. Winter weather advisories have been posted in most areas there. We'll probably see at least about 3 to 5 inches of snow. Bettles, you've already had more than that. We're thinking maybe as much as 7, but in any case, snow should start to diminish as we go through the rest of the evening hours. The low pressure system out in the west will also diminish and kind of gradually fall apart. The low in the eastern Gulf will gradually move its way southward, but it's still sloshing up some rain and maybe some high elevation snow across southern parts of southeast. It'll keep you a little breezy at times, but their overall big picture is cold is coming. And as we head into Thursday night and Friday, much colder weather for the north slope and the west coast will start to move in, and expect a lot more as we head into next week. See you later.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.